Hello everyone, Zoe is here with another video and another guest. Today I'm gonna interview Hassan Narimani, who is an engineer and he works as a senior manager in Olympic Park authorities. If you want to know more about his responsibilities and what he does, or how you can become a civil engineer in Australia, watch this video. Hi, Hassan. Thank you for joining us today. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your career journey, please?
Thank you, Zoe, for giving me the opportunity today. I'm the senior manager at Sydney Olympic Park Authority. My job is engineering. The journey, for an immigrant, the journey is always a big journey.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Anything is a journey, and for immigrants, it's a much bigger of journey.
Exactly right.
So I did my degrees back in Iran in 1999. I finished my bachelor degree. I worked over there for about 8 years, and then I moved to Australia. Yeah, it was a good time, to be honest. It was 2007-8. The whole economy was glorifying. It was a lot easier to find a job back then, I believe. But still, for an immigrant, it was, as someone who comes here, there's always, it's ups and downs. People ask for local experience. People ask for experience in Australia, in the city, in different segments. So I was I struggled a bit like any other engineer around. But I actually entered my first job as a drafter, the person who actually draws the plans.
That's right.
And after about 3-4 months, I found a job as a structural engineer. Worked in that company for about 6 years, and we hit the GFC, and the company didn't do well, so I joined the government sector. I joined City of Sydney Council. I worked there for about 5 years, and after that one, I joined Sydney Olympic Park. So that's kind of, an overview of what I've done so far.
Yeah, starting from and then being.
I worked in different capacities in different companies. So in my first job, I was a civil structural engineer. I was doing design mainly, even though my background from Iran was mostly on design management and project management.
Yeah.
So I had to, I took the first job I could get in my field. That was, mistake or wrong or right. I did it.
That's right.
It changed the course of my career a little bit because I kind of shifted from project management to design. But it was a great experience here. It was the whole new world. I think in engineering, especially structural and civil engineering, it's a bit different from IT. So the concrete is concrete all around the body. You put it the same way. You tie the element and the reinforcement the same way. So it's the good side to it. But there are always dealing with the standard. Local standard was a bit of I think, required some effort to put in to understand the standards, local standard for me. And then when I moved to the local government, the dynamic of working in a council, which is local government, is a bit different from during my career, I moved from to different jobs. So my first job was mostly design consultancy. My job in the council was kind of shifted again towards project management and design management and some detailed design. And in my Canada, I moved towards mostly asset management, strategic planning, and design review. So that's kind of shifting from, I'm just my preference. I'm moving away from the details.
That's right.
Getting into like more broader strategic planning. That's what I'm doing.
Sounds very interesting. That was actually my next question, if we can refer it to what you're saying. How construction is quite broad, right? It has all different areas, as you mentioned, like it has design and then construction to be on site physically. or in project management part or infrastructure. So how do you, like you said, you moved between those just because as your own preference, but how is all different areas in demand in Australia for someone who is looking for a job?
I think construction as a whole, you need not only the different roles in the construction as a whole, you can actually separate it into various sectors of construction.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking at, for example, you look at residential and commercial construction. So you go to a small residential construction, that's a different environment. You go to medium-sized residential and commercial construction, that's a completely, not completely, kind of different sort of environment that people can move to from the smaller ones, and usually have a higher demand because the small construction generally is mostly localized as small builders. The medium size is mostly people who are new migrant can move into.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot easier. They have a better recognition of international degrees, probably the larger companies. They understand it a bit better rather than you go into a small company, you're talking to a local family owner. They generally do not appreciate or do not understand how your degree or accreditation equivalent degree here. So that's probably, I would say, the medium sector is a lot easier. And then when you talk about infrastructure, that's a completely different aspect too. So it's more dominated by larger companies. So in a way, for a job seeker, it's actually good way. It's a good sector to join. But then because of the high risk and the potentially the background check on the accreditation is sometimes becomes a little bit more difficult than the other sector to go through. But again, you need to look at what the market needs in a whole sector. So I think when I came to Australia, there was a boom with residential and commercial, like 2007, 8. It was a massive boom. And then between 2009 to 13, there was pretty much no new construction going on. Most of the companies struggled. But then there was a huge stimulus package for the education and NBN rollout. So our company started doing lots of work for them. It was, again, the same principle of engineering, structural engineering, civil engineering, but it was in a completely different sector. And then after 2013, we had again the boom for residential. And now with this current recession, we are moving to potentially the only market that may have some capacity is the infrastructure. Infrastructure has been going on since 2010, so they never stopped, especially in New South Wales. The government is spending lots of money for various reasons from economic stimulus to create a better connection to actually enable the new constructions and the new suburbs, enable those developments. So I think in New South Wales, you're probably looking into, at the moment, you're probably looking into infrastructure. You move to other states, I think it's pretty much the same. Victoria is pretty much the most active one, is the infrastructure now. In Queensland, as far as I know, there are lots of infrastructure
that is going
announced in next 3-4 years. So I think it's a big, it depends when you come to Australia. You need to look at the market, you need to look at the economy, and it depends where you want to go. And every segment has its own requirement.
That's true. That's exactly right. So getting back to kind of like students or immigrants who are looking for the job, like if someone study in one of those Australia's university and they achieve their degree as a civil engineer, like is there any other process for them that they need to pass to be a civil engineer and find a job to be in the industry, or they can go straight to the industry and find a job? Like, do they need to have any other exam in between? Do they need to be registered somewhere?
To work for a company, they only need a degree from university. So that they can actually enter the job market, depending on how lucky they are and how what's the market demand. They should be able to find a job.
Cool.
However, if they want to build their own business and they want to actually reach a higher level of salary, depending on what company they join, or if they join a government, they usually look at that. They may look at the accreditation, and that's where things like accreditation with Engineers Australia, accreditation with Professional Australia can come to place. In New South Wales, so far, it wasn't mandatory to actually join any of these. It's a massive debate currently in the industry about why it hasn't been a mandatory requirement for engineers to become registered. They're changing the rules. In Victoria, the rule has changed. It passes, I believe, the Parliament about 2 months ago, 3 months ago. And in Queensland, any engineer to be able to practice independently, they require to be registered. There's something called RPEQ, Registered Professional
That's amazing.
Engineer Queensland, which is the government. That's the only state in Australia that requires mandatory registration for engineers. And to get that one, there are different pathways. People can go through Professionals Australia, they can go through Engineers Australia, or depending on their field of engineering, they may go to different organization and association to get that accreditation. But in New South Wales, there's a debate, and there is a very good chance that it will be approved to be mandatory requirement for joining to become a registered engineer. But when they enter Australia or exit the university, they don't need to really have that registration. They can join the workforce with a degree.
With a degree. Is that exactly the same process for someone who kind of like is an international student, or someone who is not even a student, like someone come to Australia with a skill visa, they already have their degree from overseas and they are looking for a job?
Yeah, that goes back I think pretty much it's the same. Some companies may ask from newcomers, they may ask them for the accreditation, and that's if they've gone through the skilled visa process, they should have the letter from Engineers Australia or relevant government or accreditation bodies, because part of the skilled migrant process is to writing the report, and they actually approve your degree. So they accept your degree and make it equivalent to an Australian degree. That person should have that one if they come through an skilled migrant scheme. If they haven't, and for example, if someone comes here as a partner visa, or they probably don't have it, they still can go to companies and find a job. There's nothing stopping them. Most of the companies accept that if they're good, if their CV is good, if they basically experience and background suits their need. But it really depends on the company. It really depends on the situation. Also depends on the economy and the demand as well.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And is that true that having a master's degree increases the chance to find a job in Australia in construction and civil engineering? Like if you want to interview someone,
I don't.
Two-person who
I've gone through process of employment in the city, in the government. Okay, we do it quite often in the government sector, and I've been on many panels for employing,
exactly right.
different people. It doesn't really matter though. People usually look at, depends what they want. If the skill set is there, that's generally the most important part. They don't look at the master's degree. However, in the government sector, they probably look at it more. And if that master's degree is relevant to that job that you are trying to do, yeah, it's a big plus.
That's right.
Yeah.
Cool. And then how about working hours? Like, how is working hours for someone who is an engineer and need to work on construction side? Like, is that like as a normal standard working hours, 5 to 9, or they have to work harder?
Uh,
They have to work on the shifts?
um, yeah, that's a good question. I think it really depends on the company that you work for, and it depends on the culture of that company. If you go to a small construction company, they probably expect you to work on long hours, like start 7 o'clock in the morning, leave at 5 or even later, depending. As much as a day, you see the daylight, you should be working there. And sometimes they even ask you to work on Saturdays as well.
Mm.
Most of the construction company do that. There and usually that reflects into the salary. So if you work as a project manager on a construction company, if it's in a good economic time,
Mhm.
I think that reflects into your salary. You get paid a little bit more. Um, and it's the same with consultancies. Depends on how under pressure they are. How I think it has changed drastically in the last 10, 12 years here. So I remember when it was 2007, it wasn't that competitive, the market. So the company would easily get a job with a reasonable price. But there was less pressure on the engineers to finish the job. But
No.
now the market is so competitive, they have to actually push everyone to work harder. So
Mhm.
I've seen people working in companies that always they worried about their health, they worried about the long hour working, and that was partially the reason I actually joined the council. I thought we had the little one, and I thought, okay, I need to actually balance my life a little bit.
That's exactly right. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
Um, and one more question regarding renovation. So, like, if someone want to be in the field of renovation, do they need to have degree as well, or it's just something that they need to kind of like be passionate about, or like it's kind
I think it depends on what kind of renovation they want to do,
of.
and um, I can't answer that question quite well. But there's a massive change in regulation coming up in next year or so because of the issues with the building issues. So there are new regulation coming up. The whole building code has and building regulation is changing, especially in New South Wales. That requires more degree, requires registration of the tradies. So
Mhm.
that's going to impact that sector potentially a bit more.
That's
And we're going to see that's the aim of what the government is doing, that they're going to see more people registering and get a better oversight of the construction going on.
mm,
If it's a simple renovation, a kitchen or finishes, that probably doesn't bother anyone. But
mm,
as soon as you want a major renovation that requires a development application to the council, those regulations may impact
that's interesting to kind of like make
it.
sure they can protect the construction and they can protect the buildings, right? They just gonna make sure they wouldn't
Yeah,
be
so
any issues.
that's a very interesting thing, and has been a very interesting topic in
Mm,
amongst the engineers and building surveyors in Australia. Since the Opal Tower issue that occurred, in Sydney, you may
exactly right.
have heard of, um, there's been lots of debate about the building issues.
Mhm.
So, if I'm going to give you an example, um, the there are certain elements in the building that by law, requires inspections. For example, one of them is the waterproofing of the kitchen and bathrooms.
Mhm.
The other one, there are the structural elements that hold the building up. So even the structural elements, they don't require not every single element requires inspection by a building certifier, but some require. So if you are actually if you want to actually renovate your building and then you are putting a DA to the council, then you require sign off by a building certifier, and the building certifier will look at your plan and say, okay, I want to look at the waterproofing here. And the discussion currently is that the waterproofing should be done by an accredited tradie, which
Mhm.
is not currently the case. So how far the regulation going to go, it depends on the government. because they don't want to kill off lots of activities in the market. It's a big market out there. It's a big part of the economy, but also they want to make sure it's the quality. So the government tries to balance that one now at the moment with the new regulation. So it's going to have a major impact on the probably high rise a lot more and medium size constructions. But for a smaller one, there might be some implications.
Okay, to kind of like ensure safety would be the while.
Yeah, there is one thing. For example, there might be an increase if you don't have the certification, and it depends again on the new regulation coming out. If you want to insure your building and the building insurance, you understand that you have renovated a building without any certification, they may actually put a massive premium on your building. That sort of implication may happen, and then to actually push people to create a better quality work. That's all it is about.
Fantastic, great information. Thank you, Hassan. And at the end, is there any tip or advice for students or immigrants who are looking for the job and they want to be an engineer like you in the future?
I think there are always, when we come from overseas, there's one thing I want to always tell people who come from overseas especially, is to look at the market that you are trying to find a job through. People don't understand sometimes, like I said, construction has different sectors. Like if you go as a structural engineer into residential and commercial, I'm talking about 5 years ago, I don't know what the fees are now. I've been away from that sort of discussions in the last 5 years. Well, one thing I realized is, like, if you are working as a structural engineer and you work in residential and commercial, the company you are working for can charge the client, say, $180 per hour. You don't get that money. You probably get $50 per hour, but they have an overhead. But if the same work, exactly the same work, is done in the telecommunication sector, if you are, for example, doing the same structural engineering for a Telstra exchange, same building, same type of work, the company can only charge $140 an hour. There is a massive difference. Even same job, there's a big difference between the salaries in different sectors of the construction.
Interesting.
So people usually don't understand that, and then they go enter one market, and then they're worried about the future, that the salary don't go up as much as their friends, and that's probably the sector they're working on. That's one thing that to be mindful of. The second one is it's very important to understand what the job descriptions are, because the job description for a structural engineer, architect, they're slightly different from what we expect overseas or what we do overseas, especially if someone comes from Middle East or India or China, they might be slightly different. For instance, like architects are supposed to be the main coordinator of everything. So it's not the job that always the architects do. They do it to some extent, but not to the extent that it's done in Australia. So that they need to be mindful of those little bits of pieces of skills that they may need to acquire to get a better job. The skills in coordination, the skills in not only the local knowledge of the stuff, but the little bits, partial skills that they are in the job description, but wasn't before overseas. So that they need to understand those bits. And there are also jobs in Australia that are ridiculously on demand, and it's a bit difficult to get into. Like I take one example. If someone becomes a fire engineer now, the fire engineering has a massive demand in Australia. So I don't see not many people go to that field, and partially because the fire engineering regulation usually is different here, so that requires a master's degree. But if someone does a master's or graduate degree here in a fire engineer, there's a big chance of getting a good job. So that there are very niche sectors in the market that have a very high demand for skilled people. And I usually don't see it in the migrant people. Like people come here as a structural engineer or hydraulic engineers. They can do a master's degree, become a fire engineer, and that pays them probably 30% more.
Wow.
And they find their job a lot easier. Obviously, they need to know the regulation. They need to get a little bit, study a little bit in Australia. They should be mindful of those stuff as well.
That's right. So you kind of like encourage them, not just thinking about finding a job as soon as they arrived. It's good to kind of like have a look in the market or increase their degree to kind of like see what else is in demand in the market, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thanks for your all
No
great
worries.
information, and thanks for taking your time today out of your busy day.
Yeah, thank you for your time as well, and thanks for considering me here. If there was anything, let me know. You got my details, and I'm happy if you share my LinkedIn profile with with your with the
Sure.
people, the
That's
audience.
great. Yeah, definitely.
I do not promise to answer all of the questions, but if I get time, I will.
Definitely. Thank you very much,
All
Hassan.
right.
Thank you. Okay, guys, hope you enjoyed watching the conversation. If you have any question, comment below. Hassan and I will answer your questions. And please don't forget to thumbs up if you like the video. And don't forget to subscribe me if you want me to produce more video like this for you. Thank you.